Okay, 7th and 8th graders, this is your video lesson for today. When you get finished, you are going to get a chance to go ahead and start your homework. Today's lesson is on Chapter 5, Lesson 6. It's writing and solving proportions. And you usually have seen proportions when you say things like 2 girls to 4 boys, or 1 can of soup to 4 people. Or 3 red marbles out of 7 red marbles. All of these are proportions. We also call them ratios. Now, we've also done things in the past where if your ratio is this one, 2 girls to 4 boys, and then you say, oh, I have 10 girls, how many boys do I have? And you've been able to solve for x. So let's start there. Let's start with that simple e. So if we have 2 girls to 4 boys, that's our ratio or our proportion, and then I say, oh, we really have 10 girls, how many boys do we have? So x in this case is equal to the number of boys. That's what we're solving for. And it's really important in the algebra that you make sure that you can name your variable and you can tell me what it is that you're actually solving for. Not necessarily the answer, but what that variable is actually standing for. So there are a couple different ways to solve this problem. So I'm going to draw my little line that I do when I'm going to show you multiple ways. And I'm going to remind you that when these problems are really, really basic, you can often figure them out without using your algebra steps. However, I'm going to require your algebra steps. So a lot of you look at this problem and you say, to get from the 2 to the 10 in algebra, I really multiplied by 5. And 2 times 5 made 10. And we know that if we do something to the numerator, we have to do it to the denominator, which means that I would multiply the denominator by a 5 as well. So that would make this x a 20. And then you could say x is equal to 20. And that is one method. And in reality, we wouldn't just say x is 20. We would say x is 20 boys because we had started with some sort of a word problem or a story that went with it. Now, I want to remind you of a few things. One, that you multiply whatever you do to the numerator, you do to the denominator, because you're really multiplying by the equivalent form of 1, 5 over 5. And remember, 5 divided by 5 is 1. And as long as you multiply something by 1, you have made an equivalent fraction. And that's what you're looking at. You're saying that this is an equivalent fraction because of this equal sign. And that's how we're able to solve for that x is equal to 20 boys. However, I'm not going to allow you to do that method. I want you to utilize your algebra steps. And the reason is because our problems are not going to stay this easy. As we continue on with algebra, it's only going to get harder. So yes, I'm using some easy problems for you that you can solve in your head. However, I'm doing that because I want you to practice your steps. So let's take this problem again. 2/4 is equal to 10 over x, and let's use our algebra steps. Now, algebra says that when we are using proportions, we can cross multiply. We can use cross products. And so I always multiply up and at an angle. So x times 2 gives me 2x. And then I have my equal to sign, and 4 times 10 gives me 40. And now it looks like a problem that we were doing last week where we need to isolate our variable. And in order to get this x alone, we say to ourselves, what is the operation? Well, this is 2 times x. And therefore, I have to use my opposite operation. The opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And I've just made an equivalent form of 1 here, which means that my x is left all by itself, which was the whole purpose of doing divide by 2. We wanted x alone. But if I divide by 2 on one side, I have to divide by 2 on the other side. So 40 divided by 2 is 20. And again, the answer is not necessarily 20. The answer is really 20 boys because we started with a story. And many of the problems that we're going to do actually are word problems. Okay, so let's take a look at a little bit harder of a problem. So if I'm looking at a problem like n over 12 is equal to 3/4, this again is one of those problems that I can do in my head, but instead of multiplying, you could actually look at it in terms of division. So you can say, how did I get from this 12 to this 4? And to go from 12 to 4, I really divided by 3. But if I do it in the denominator, I have to do it in the numerator, because remember, I need to divide or multiply by equivalent forms of 1, and 3 over 3 is an equivalent form of 1. So in my head, I can figure out what divided by 3 gave me a 3. That would be this. What divided by 3 gives me this 3? Well, most of us know that that n is going to be 9. However, I'm not allowed to just simply use this method. Okay? It's a great way for checking, but not all of our problems are going to multiply or divide perfectly evenly like this. So I need you to do the math steps. So let's do the algebra. Take our problem, n divided by 12 is equal to 3/4, and let's use our algebra steps. Algebra says use cross products. So 4 times n is 4n, which is equal to 12 times 3. And if I need to do the math, do it over off to the side of your paper and show your math steps. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 1 is 3. So that makes 12 times 3, 36. And now I'm back to those simple one-step equations where I need to isolate my variable. Well, this problem now says 4 times n is equal to 36. I need to get n all alone. So the opposite of multiplication is divide. I'm going to divide by 4 on both sides. And I've just made an equivalent form of 1. 4 divided by 4 is 1. I'm left with an n. And 36 divided by 4. And again, you can do the long division over off to the side if you need to. But lots of us know that 36 divided by 4 is 9. And now I'm allowed to box my answer. Of course, you must check. Okay, so let's look at what a check looks like in this case. Just the same thing that we've been doing all last week, where we're going to check our problem and we have to start with our original equation. And now we have to plug in this value for n that we found. So we would say n over 12 is equal to 3/4. Now we have a couple options from here. We have to get it down to where they're equal to the same thing. So I can either use cross products or I can take them to decimals. So most of us know that 3 divided by 4 is 0.75, but in order to get 9 divided by 12 that way, we would probably have to use a calculator, which is not allowed, or long division, which most of us don't want to use. So I would highly recommend going ahead and using cross products. 4 times 9 is 36, and 12 times 3 is 36. So check, we've got it correct, and we know that our answer of n equals 9 is correct. You will have to do checks, so make sure that you work on them using your algebra steps as well. Okay, let's try a little bit harder of a problem. So our problem is going to be 50 over 20 is equal to z over 16. Okay, now 20 doesn't become 16 with any sort of an easy multiplication or a division. Therefore, this is why we've practiced our algebra steps, because now we're getting to the point where we really need to use our algebra, and we can't just simply say, oh, I know that if I divide by 2, I get 16. Okay, we have to do something. Now, the first thing that I probably would do, instead of working with the number 50 and 20, I can see that that number can be reduced by 10. So I'm going to simplify my 50 and my 20, and I'm going to divide it by 10 over 10. Because as long as I divide by a form of 1 and simplify my fraction, I still have the same fraction, the same number. So if I divide this by 10, or 10 over 10, I get 5 over 2 is equal to z over 16. And look, I've just made it now into a problem that we actually could probably solve in our head, right? 2 times 8 is going to give me 16. So 5 times 8 is going to give me 40. So I know my answer is z is 40. However, I still need you to show me the algebra. So I need you to show me cross products. And 5 times 16, I might need to come over to the side of my paper to do. 5 times 6 is 30. Carry my 3. 5 times 1 is 5. Plus 3 is 8. So I get 80 is equal to 2z. And now this problem says 2 times z. And in order to get my z alone, I have to do the opposite operation. Opposite of multiplication is division. So 2z divided by 2 really leaves me with 1z. And if I divide on one side, I have to divide on the other side. 80 divided by 2 is 40. So my answer is 40. But again, I'm going to have to check my answer. And to check my answer, I have to use my original problem, 50 over 20 is equal to z over 16. And now I get to plug in my value of z, so I'm going to leave 50 over 20 is equal to 40 over 16. Now here you can use cross products, it's totally fine. Or you can do some division, you can do some reducing of your fractions. As long as you show me the steps, it's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and use cross products, and then off to the side I'm going to do it in a different way. So 16 times 50 is really this problem, except that I added a 0 here. So that means I have to add a 0 here. So 50 times 16 is really 800. And 2 times 4 is 8, and then I have those 2 zeros. So I just proved that 800 equals 800, and z really is 40. But I could do it a different way. I could say that 50 over 20 reduced to 5 halves, and I could also take 40 over 16 and I could divide it by 4. And if I divide it by 4 over 4, 40 divided by 4 is 10, and 16 divided by 4 is 4. So I just reduced it. Well, I could reduce that fraction a little more. And I could say I have 5 halves and reduce the 10/4. And I can see that 10 has a 2 and a 5 in it, and 4 has a 2 and a 2 in it, and I can reduce by 2 again. And I end up with 5 halves. And I've checked my problem that way as well. Now, as long as you show me your steps, I don't care which method you use. If you're going to take it to a decimal, that's fine as well, as long as I can see that you did it with long division, because a calculator will not be allowed on the test. Okay, let's try another problem. Okay, so they don't keep it easy forever, and they start to throw in problems with decimals. So the next problem we're going to do is 6.8 over 15.4 is equal to 40.8 over x. Now this one's not so easy, right? It's got these decimals in it. We need to figure out what we're going to do. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to use cross products. And we're going to say that we have 6.8 times x. So that's 6.8 x is equal to, and now we're going to multiply in this direction. And so I'm going to show you the step. It's 15.4 times, and I think I'm going to put it in parentheses so that we can see it better, 40.8. Well, most of us can't do that in our head. Some of us might be able to. But that means that over off on the side of my paper, I'm going to need to do some multiplication, which we have practiced multiplying with decimals earlier this year. So we should be fine with it. So 4 times 8 is 32. Carry my 3. 4 times 0 is 0, plus 3 is 3. 4 times 4 is 16. Now I'm going to hold my place, and I'm going to do 5. 5 times 8 is 40. Carry my 4. 5 times 0 is 0, plus 4 is 4. 5 times 4 is 20. Now I have to hold 2 spaces. 1 times 8 is 8. 1 times 0 is 0. 1 times 4 is 4. And now I get to add this all together. And I end up with 62832. But I have to remember that I have decimals. 1, 2. That means my decimal place has to be 2 numbers in. So my real number is 628.32. So I'm going to put that into my problem. 6.8x is equal to 628.32. Now I have to get my x all alone. And to get my x alone, I have to realize that it's 6.8 times x. So the opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide one side by 6.8 and the other side by 6.8. This one makes an equivalent form of 1. 6.8 divided by 6.8 is 1. So I'm left with an x. And now I have to do that long division, which means that off to the side of my paper, I'm going to have 628.32 divided by 6.8. Now we know that we need to move our decimal one place and put it up. And now we're done with decimals. As long as we keep our numbers lined up, we should be fine. So what we're saying is, how many times does 68 go into 6? It goes in 0 times. How many times does 68 go into 62? It goes in 0 times. How many times does 68 go into 628? Well, I'm going to guess 9, because 10 would be 680. So I'm just going to guess a little bit less and see if I'm right. 9 times 8 is 72. Carry my 7. 9 times 6 is 54. Plus 7 is going to be 61. And now I'm going to subtract. So I get 16. So I have to bring down my 3. And 68 goes into 163. I'm going to guess about maybe 2 times, because 60 times 60 is 120. And another 60 won't fit in there. So I'm going to guess 2 times. 6 times 8 is 16. Carry my 1. Oh, I don't know what I said. 2 times 8 is 16. Carry my 1. 2 times 6 is 12. Sorry, I think I said it wrong again. 2 times 8 is 16. Carry my 1. 2 times 6 is 12. Plus 1 is 13. And I'm going to subtract, but I have to borrow. So I get 27. And now I have to bring down my 2. And 68, I'm going to guess, goes into 272 about 4 times. 4 times 8 is 32. Carry my 3. 4 times 6 is 24. Plus 3 is 27. So my answer is this thing. So I need to put it over here. 92.4. And now I can box my answer. But guess what? I have to check. So you're going to be doing a lot of work with decimals. So make sure you do your checks. Okay, I'm going to show you one that gets a little bit harder. We do have to work with integers. Remember, integers are both positive and negative numbers. So we could have something like 256 divided by 9.6 is equal to negative 1.6 over x. Now this has the fraction piece, the proportions. It has a decimal component, which was new. And now they're adding in an integer component where we're working with negative numbers. So we do the same steps. This is why your algebra steps are so important when you're using the basic numbers. So let's use our algebra steps. 256 times x is 256x is equal to, and I have to do 9.6 times a negative 1.6. So again, I'm going to write it just so I can see it, and then I'm going to come over to the side of my paper and I'm going to do the math. So the math says 1.6 times 9.6. One of them is negative and one of them is positive, which means my answer is going to be negative. And I can write this side already because I know what he is. I just need to solve this multiplication piece. But I know a positive times a negative gives me this negative. So my answer is going to come out negative. Let's do the math. 6 times 6 is 36. Carry my 3. 6 times 1 is 6. Plus 3 is 9. hold my space, 9 times 6 is 54, carry my 5. 9 times 1 is 9, plus 5 is 14. And I add, and I get 1536, but I need a decimal place of 2 spaces, one here and one here. So my answer is really 15.36, and it is negative. Now I need to get x all alone, and this says 256 times x. So the opposite of times is to divide by 256. So I divide by 256. And I get an equivalent form of 1, so I'm left with an x is equal to, and a negative divided by a positive is a negative. Now think about this for a minute. 15 wholes divided by 256 wholes. Our number is going to be super, super tiny, but I have to do the math. So I need to do 15.36 divided by 256. And yes, I'm expecting you to do the math yourself. You may use a calculator to check and make sure you got it right. However, I must see this long division on your paper because this is your chance to practice it. So 256 does not go into 15, and it doesn't go into 153 either, so I'm putting a 0. It does go into 1,536, and I'm going to guess it goes in about 6 times. 6 times 6 is 36, carry my 3. 6 times 5 is 30, plus 3 is 33. 6 times 2 is 12, plus 3 is 15. And when I subtract, I get a 0. So my answer is 0.06, and we already put our negative over here because remember, it was a negative divided by a positive. This is my answer. And of course, you should check it. Okay, I'm going to show you one more because it does get, actually I think I'm going to show you 2 more because it's harder. And what happens is they don't keep it with just regular numbers anymore. They give us more of a monomial or a binomial to work with. So if we have the fraction 2 divided by x plus 2 is equal to 18 over 27. And now they've just replaced what used to be our variable with a binomial, a 2-term problem. But guess what? We solve it the same way. We use all the same math steps. So we're going to take our cross products and say 2 times 27, which if we need to, we can come over here. 2 times 27 is 54 equals, and now do this piece, x plus 2 times 18. And this is where I want to write it first. This is really 18 times x plus 2. And this parenthesis is really important because remember, this guy is actually one number. It is something, and therefore we want to keep it together with those parentheses. But in order to solve it, we're now going to have to distribute our 18 to both compartments. So we're going to end up with 54 is equal to 18x plus, and then 18 times 2, which is 36. And now we have ended up with a 2-step equation to get that x alone. The first step is to add that negative 36 to both sides. And when I do that, I'm left with an 18x over on this side. And I'm left with, if I do my subtraction, I'm left with 18 on this side. Now in order to get x alone, I have to remember this is 18 times x, so I'm going to divide by 18, making an equivalent form of 1, and I get x equals, but if I divide by 18 on one side, I have to divide by 18 on the other, and I end up with 1 equals x. Okay, not so bad. Let's do one more of these to practice. So this guy to practice, let's try x minus 2 over 8 is equal to 30 over 40. Let's do our math steps. We're going to cross multiply, which means 40 times that x minus 2, remember those parentheses, they're very important, is equal to 8 times 30. And 8 times 3 is 24 with that 0 on the end. So now I have to distribute. 40 times x is 40x minus 40 times 2, which is 80, is equal to 240. In order to get my x alone, I first have to add the 80 to both sides. And I'm left with 40x is equal to, and now when I add these two pieces, they're both positive numbers, so it's going to come out positive. 4 plus 8 is 12, carry my 1, so I get 320. Now in order to get x alone, I have to say that this is 40 times x. So the opposite is to divide by 40 on both sides. I'm left with an x equals, because I've made an equivalent form of 1. Now I can see that both of these guys have a 0, which means I can divide by 10 and cross it off. And 32 divided by 4 is 8. So x is equal to 8 in this problem. Okay, hopefully this makes sense. You guys are going to do on these concepts. You can start it in class. You're going to start with page 279 to 280, and you're going to do problems number 3 through 24 all, and you're going to do numbers 28 to 33 all. And these guys are your word problems. Okay? And the rest of them are your regular number problems. Okay, I'll see you guys tomorrow.